The Sith were never meant to survive. Their strength was their weakness, their ambition their undoing. For generations they spread like wildfire across the galaxy, numbering in the thousands, each one seeking greater power than the last. They built vast empires, waged devastating wars, and sought dominion over the Force itself. But their hunger was insatiable. Their need to dominate, to rise above all others, ensured their inevitable collapse. The Sith did not fall to the Jedi. They fell to themselves. By the time of the new Sith Wars, their once mighty legions had descended into chaos. The Brotherhood of Darkness, under the leadership of Lord Khan, was the final expression of their decay. In an attempt to unify the Sith, Khan abandoned the tradition of a single Dark Lord, choosing instead to rule alongside his fellow Sith as equals. But equality among the Sith was an illusion. Without a sole figure of absolute authority, infighting ran rampant. Their battles were no longer about conquest, but survival. Sith turning on Sith, each seeking to destroy their rivals before being destroyed themselves. Khan's vision of unity was a lie, and even he knew it. He preached loyalty while plotting against his own generals. He demanded obedience, but surrounded himself with those who would betray him at the first opportunity. The Brotherhood of Darkness was not an empire. It was a slow, desperate collapse masked by the illusion of control. The Jedi Order, battered and worn from centuries of war, saw an opportunity to strike the final blow. The conflict led both Jedi and Sith to Ruusan, the barren world that would become their graveyard. Ruusan was not a battle, it was annihilation. The Jedi, led by Lord Hoth and the Army of Light, sought to erase the Sith from existence. The Sith, weakened by their own division, were fighting not for victory, but for survival. Thousands perished in waves of destruction, the once mighty Sith Lords reduced to desperate warriors clawing for any chance at escape. And yet, even as their forces dwindled, Khan refused to surrender. He convinced himself that the Sith could still claim victory, not through strategy, not through force of arms, but through the power of the dark side itself. The thought bomb was his final act, a ritual so destructive that it would consume not just the Jedi, but the Sith themselves. Khan and his followers gathered in the depths of Ruusan's caves, pooling their hatred, their desperation, their fear into a single devastating attack. The Jedi, unaware of the true nature of the ritual, pressed forward, believing they had cornered the Sith at last. But as the ritual reached its peak, reality itself seemed to shudder. In an instant, the Force ripped apart, collapsing upon itself in a surge of energy that devoured everything in its path. The battlefield fell silent. The thought bomb did not discriminate. It consumed Jedi and Sith alike, trapping their spirits in an eternal void. Ruusan became a graveyard, not just of bodies, but of souls. The war was over, but at what cost? The Jedi believed they had won. The Sith, as an order, had been eradicated. There were no survivors, no remnants of their empire, no Sith Lords left to rebuild. But the Jedi were wrong. One survived. Darth Bane had foreseen the Sith's destruction long before Ruusan. He knew that as long as they remained a legion, as long as they sought power through numbers, they would always fall into the same cycle: ambition, betrayal, war, and annihilation. The Brotherhood of Darkness had sealed its fate long before the thought bomb. Their downfall was inevitable because their philosophy was flawed. True power could never be shared. Bane understood what Khan never could. The Sith did not need many. They needed only two. The rule of two was not born from victory, but from failure. Bane did not create it out of strength, but out of necessity. He looked upon the ruins of the Sith and saw not the end, but the beginning of something greater. An empire of shadows, a dynasty built not on armies, but on patience. The Sith would not rise again by waging open war against the Jedi. They would rise by infiltrating the very fabric of the galaxy. Bane's survival was not an accident. The Force willed it. He had seen the Brotherhood's destruction coming long before Ruusan. He had embraced it, even ensured it, guiding events so that he alone would emerge from the carnage. As the Jedi celebrated their supposed victory, as the galaxy took its first breath in an age without Sith, Bane disappeared into the darkness. The last Sith Lord, the first of a new order. The Jedi had spent centuries fighting an enemy they believed they could defeat through sheer force. They never understood the Sith's true nature. The Sith did not die on Ruusan. They were reborn. The seeds of their ultimate revenge had already been planted. The galaxy would not know it yet, but the Sith had become something far more dangerous than they had ever been before. A single spark hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to ignite the flames of war once more. Darth Bane would never be remembered in the history books of the Republic. His name would be lost to time, erased by the very system he sought to destroy. But his vision would endure. His successors would follow his teachings, each one stronger than the last, and centuries later, his grand design would reach its apex in the form of a Sith Lord who would bring the Jedi to their knees and rule the galaxy unopposed. The Brotherhood of Darkness was dead. The Sith Empire was no more. But the Sith had only just begun. Before the Sith Order could be reborn, it had to die. Before Darth Bane could reshape the dark side, he had to endure its cruelty. His origins were not written in the grand halls of Korriban or the hidden chambers of the Sith Academy. He was not born into power, nor did he inherit knowledge from a long line of Sith Lords. He was raised in the filth of Apprentice, a desolate mining world where cruelty was law and survival was earned through hardship. His name was Dessel, a boy destined for nothing, a slave in all but name, crushed under the weight of his father's rage and the endless toil of cortosis mining. His suffering began early. Hurst, his father, saw nothing but weakness in his son. Every glance was met with disdain, every failure punished with brutality. Dessel learned that pain was not an occasional punishment, it was a constant. But he also learned something else. He could feel things others could not. He could sense his father's anger before the blows came. He could read the intent of men before they spoke. The Force whispered to him long before he knew what it was. A lifetime of beatings hardened his resolve. He would never be weak again. The first step toward his true path came when he turned that pain against his father. Hurst's heart failed one night, and Dessel knew deep within himself that it was not mere chance. The Force had moved through him. It had answered his silent rage, and yet there was no satisfaction, only a deeper hunger. Apprentice had taught him one truth: power was the only escape. The Republic found him first. Drafted into the war against the Sith, he became a soldier out of necessity. Yet even among warriors, he was different. He did not fight with reckless abandon or blind courage. He fought with instinct, knowing the enemy's moves before they made them. He was more than just a soldier. He was something else entirely, something waiting to be named. It was the Sith who gave him that name. Fate guided him to Korriban, where the Sith Academy awaited. He abandoned Dessel in the wastelands of his past. He was reborn as Bane. But the Sith he encountered were not the all-powerful lords he had imagined. They squabbled like scavengers, each seeking a greater title, yet none understanding the true nature of power. The Brotherhood of Darkness, they called themselves, a collective of Sith who had abandoned the very philosophy that made them strong. Bane saw them for what they were, cowards hiding behind a false unity. They preached equality among Sith, a doctrine that went against everything the dark side represented. Their leader, Lord Khan, was the worst of them all. A man who wielded power yet did not understand it. A Sith Lord who feared true strength. The more Bane learned, the more he saw the cracks in their foundation. The Sith were rotting from within, their empire built on compromise rather than domination. His time at the Academy was a revelation. He consumed knowledge at a pace that unsettled even the instructors. He devoured the texts of ancient Sith Lords, Revan, Malak, Nagasado, Exar Kun, seeking wisdom that had been buried beneath the Brotherhood's weakness. The dark side was not meant to be shared. Power belonged to those strong enough to seize it, and yet the Sith had diluted their own strength. But Bane was still young, still learning. He was tested, broken, and reshaped within the halls of Korriban. He fought rivals, nearly died in duels, and suffered through endless trials. Yet every failure only sharpened him further. It was not the Brotherhood that made him strong. It was his own defiance, his refusal to accept their flawed doctrine. His moment of revelation came not in battle, but in exile. Cast out from the Academy for questioning their ways, he wandered alone, seeking deeper truths. It was then that he found the holocron of Darth Revan, a relic of a time when the Sith had truly understood power. Through Revan's teachings, Bane saw the path forward. He saw the truth that Khan and his followers had failed to grasp. The Sith had lost their way. Their numbers had made them weak. Their unity was a lie. There could be no brotherhood. There could only be a master and an apprentice. From that moment, the fate of the Sith was sealed. Bane did not seek to reform the Brotherhood. He sought its destruction. Every lesson he had learned, from his father's cruelty, from the battlefields of the Republic, from the failures of Korriban, had led him to one undeniable conclusion. The Sith must be purged. He played the long game, waiting for the moment when the Brotherhood would destroy itself. And when that moment came, when the Sith and Jedi clashed on Ruusan, he watched, knowing that the dark side would soon belong to him alone. The rule of two had not yet been spoken, but it had already begun. Bane would rise, not as a warlord, not as a general, but as the architect of the Sith's true rebirth. One master, one apprentice, no more, no less. He had seen the weakness of the Sith. Now he would ensure that weakness never returned. Darth Bane understood what the Sith before him had failed to grasp. Power, when spread thin, became fragile. The Sith had collapsed under the weight of their own ambition, their numbers growing so large that infighting had become inevitable. The Brotherhood of Darkness had tried to impose order, to make all Sith equals, but in doing so, they had denied the very essence of the dark side. Bane saw this weakness and knew that for the Sith to survive, they had to evolve. Their path forward was not through conquest or mass recruitment, but through discipline, secrecy, and patience. Thus the rule of two was born, a master to embody power, an apprentice to crave it, no more, no less. It was a philosophy that ensured the Sith would never again fall to infighting, never again allow weakness to corrupt their order. Through this system, knowledge and strength would pass from one generation to the next, each apprentice surpassing their master, ensuring that only the strongest ruled. The Sith would not merely endure, they would grow stronger with each succession. But this philosophy came with a paradox. The Sith, driven by ambition, would always seek to overthrow their superiors. The apprentice was not meant to remain loyal forever. Their purpose was to learn, to grow, to one day challenge their master and take their place. and when they succeeded, they would find a new apprentice, continuing the cycle. The rule of two was not about peace among Sith. It was about refinement through conflict. Bane himself would be the first to test this doctrine. He had emerged from the ashes of Ruusan as the sole survivor of the Sith. The Jedi believed their ancient enemy had been vanquished, and Bane ensured they remained in that belief. The Sith would not rise again through brute force. They would exist in the shadows, watching, waiting, striking only when the time was right. The galaxy would belong to them, but not through reckless war. The Jedi would fall, not by the might of an army, but by the precision of a single blade. Yet for the rule of two to work, there needed to be a worthy apprentice. Power without succession was a dead end. Bane searched for one who could inherit his vision, one who understood that power must be earned, not shared. He found her on the prison world of Ryloth, a young girl raw in her rage, burning with untapped potential. He named her Darth Zannah, and in doing so set the first true test of his philosophy into motion. Zannah was unlike the Sith of the past. She did not rely on brute strength, nor did she seek dominance through force alone. She was patient, calculating, embodying the very ideals Bane wished to instill. Her power was not just in combat, but in manipulation, deception, and the understanding that true power was wielded in the unseen spaces between battles. She did not seek to overthrow Bane immediately, as lesser Sith might have. She learned from him, absorbed his knowledge, waiting for the moment when she would surpass him. The rule of two was working, but did Bane truly believe in his own doctrine? He had created a system designed to ensure that the Sith would grow stronger over time, yet when the moment came, when Zannah was meant to challenge him, he hesitated. He sought ways to prolong his own existence, delving into forbidden Sith rituals, experimenting with the transfer of essence to new bodies. Perhaps even in him, the fear of being replaced had taken root. In the end, the system he had created was merciless. Zannah did what she was always meant to do. She struck down her master, proving that she was stronger. Bane's own rule had ensured his demise. The Sith did not stagnate under his leadership. They evolved beyond him. This was the very essence of the rule of two, survival through destruction. But did this ideology doom the Sith as much as it strengthened them? For generations, the Sith continued this cycle. From Bane to Zannah, from Zannah to Cognos, from Cognos to her successors, the system endured. Each Sith Lord grew more cunning, more powerful, ensuring that the weak never ruled. And yet the very nature of the rule of two created a vulnerability. There were always only two Sith at a time, and should both fall, the order would be lost. This was the flaw Bane had not foreseen. His vision was built on strength, but strength alone could not ensure survival. The Sith had the patience to wait centuries in the shadows, but their numbers were too few to withstand even a single moment of failure. They had designed a philosophy that weeded out weakness, yet in doing so, they had made themselves fragile. And yet it worked. It was this very philosophy that led to the rise of Darth Sidious, the final master of Bane's lineage, the one who would achieve what the Sith had long sought, the complete annihilation of the Jedi. Sidious understood that brute strength alone would not end the Jedi Order. He followed the true path of the Sith: secrecy, manipulation, deception. He infiltrated the Republic, turned democracy against itself, and orchestrated a war that ensured the Jedi's downfall. The rule of two had succeeded. The Sith had won. But at what cost? Bane's vision had ensured the Sith's survival, but it had also chained them to an endless cycle of destruction. Each master would rise, only to be struck down by their apprentice. The Sith would never know peace, never know stability. They would forever be locked in a struggle where only power dictated survival. In the end, this philosophy would lead to their downfall once more, for it was through this very system that Darth Vader would one day destroy his own master, ending the Sith as an order. So, did Bane's ideology ensure the Sith's survival, or did it ultimately condemn them to extinction? Perhaps the greatest irony of the Rule of Two was that its final success also marked its inevitable end. Korriban, an unyielding wasteland of jagged cliffs and sun-scorched valleys, a world that had once pulsed with the might of the Sith. Here, in the deep tombs carved into the rock, lay the remnants of an empire that had nearly consumed the galaxy. It was more than a burial ground. It was a monument to power, to ambition, to a dark side that refused to be forgotten. It was to this world that Darth Bane came, seeking wisdom from those who had ruled before him. The spirits of the ancient Sith still lingered in the crypts of Korriban. Their voices, echoes of minds that had long since turned to dust, whispered through the halls of their own tombs. There were no Jedi here to silence them, no Republic to erase their legacy. Their knowledge had not been lost, only waiting. And Bane, the last true Sith, had come to claim it. But Korriban was not a place of welcome. The spirits did not offer their wisdom freely. They tested those who sought their secrets, exposing weakness, feeding on fear. The greatest Sith in history had been laid to rest here. Naga Sadow, Marka Ragnos, Tulak Horde, each had carved their name into history with power alone. Bane, who had cast aside the Brotherhood of Darkness, had to prove that he was worthy to stand among them. Deep within the Valley of the Dark Lords, Bane walked the path of those who had come before. He was not the first to seek knowledge among the dead, but he was different from those who had failed. He did not come looking for shortcuts to power. He did not believe in the broken philosophies of the past. He sought understanding. True power was not in mindless aggression, not in numbers or chaos. It was in control, in the careful refinement of strength. The Sith before him had built empires, but they had also destroyed themselves. Bane had no intention of repeating their mistakes. In the tomb of Darth Revan, he found a truth that reshaped his vision. Revan had walked the line between dark and light, understanding that the Force itself was neither good nor evil. It was power, and power was meant to be used. The Jedi feared the dark side because they did not understand it. The Sith before Bane had embraced it blindly, allowing their passions to consume them. But Revan had mastered it, bending it to his will. The Rule of Two had been Bane's creation, but here, in the shadows of Korriban, he saw the deeper meaning. The Sith would not rise through conquest. They would rise through patience. They would move in the darkness, unseen, shaping the future from the shadows. Yet there was something else hidden within these ancient tombs, something older than Bane had anticipated. The lost art of Sith sorcery. Unlike the brute strength of Sith warriors or the cunning of their assassins, Sith sorcery was an art of pure willpower. It was the manipulation of the Force through ritual, through words and symbols that bound reality itself. It was knowledge that the Jedi feared above all else, for it did not simply corrupt the mind, it rewrote it. The Sith of old had shaped entire battlefields with a single incantation, bending the Force to create storms, illusions, and death itself. Bane saw the potential in these forbidden arts, but he also saw their danger. Power without control was ruin, and the Sith had already suffered too much ruin, so he took only what he needed. He learned the secrets of essence transfer, the knowledge of Sith holocrons, the deeper truths of the dark side that would ensure his rule was never forgotten. The Jedi had buried the Sith, believing them to be extinct. But the Sith had never needed numbers. They had never needed armies. They had only ever needed one mind, one will, one purpose. Yet even as Bane claimed the wisdom of the ancients, the spirits of Korriban whispered warnings. They had seen this before. They had seen Sith rise, only to fall. Some even questioned whether Bane was truly the one to fulfill the destiny they had foreseen. The Sith had long prophesied that a chosen one would rise from their order, a Dark Lord who would finally succeed where all others had failed. Was Bane that Dark Lord? Or was he merely another step toward something greater? Bane did not concern himself with prophecy. He did not need the approval of ghosts. His vision was clear. The past was dead, but its lessons would live on through him. He would be the first of a new lineage, the architect of a Sith order that would not burn out in self-destruction, but sharpen itself like a blade, honed across generations. As he left Korriban behind, he carried more than knowledge. He carried a legacy. The spirits of the ancient Sith had tested him, and whether they had approved or not, he had taken what he needed. Their time was over. Now, it was his time. And in the centuries to come, his teachings would not be forgotten. From the shadows, his rule would shape the galaxy, ensuring that the Sith would not only survive, but triumph. The Brotherhood of Darkness stood at the precipice of annihilation, blind to the destruction they had wrought upon themselves. Their philosophy, one of misguided equality among the Sith, had turned them into a fractured, self-defeating order, a mockery of the power they claimed to wield. Lord Khan, the Brotherhood's so-called leader, preached unity, but true Sith did not share power. They took it. And so, as their final battle against the Jedi unfolded on the barren world of Ruusan, Darth Bane watched from the shadows, knowing that the Sith of old were already dead. For years, the Brotherhood had spread itself thin, waging a war that exhausted their strength and dulled their ambition. They fought as an army, not as individuals, failing to see that the Sith were never meant to function as the Jedi did. Khan and his followers had turned the dark side into a weapon of mass cooperation, rather than a crucible for the strongest. Bane understood this flaw from the moment he joined them. The Sith were not equals, they were predators. There could be only one true master of the dark side, and Bane had decided it would be him. But Bane was not content to simply overthrow Khan. The Brotherhood's failure had to be absolute. It had to serve as a lesson, a final proof that the Sith needed to be reforged from the ashes of their own destruction. And so, he planted the seeds of their demise, feeding Khan's delusions while guiding him toward an end he would never see coming. The instrument of their destruction was something ancient, something powerful, an ability that had been lost to the Sith for centuries. The Thought Bomb. A weapon of pure dark side energy, the Thought Bomb was a creation of Sith sorcery, a ritual capable of annihilating the minds and spirits of all who were caught in its grasp. It was not a tool of conquest, it was a tool of oblivion. Only the most desperate, the most reckless, would dare to use such a thing. Bane knew this, and he knew that Khan, consumed by arrogance and paranoia, would see it as his last, desperate gambit to turn the tide of war. As the Jedi, led by Lord Hoth and the Army of Light, descended upon the last stronghold of the Sith on Ruusan, Khan saw no victory. His forces had dwindled, his generals had begun to question him, and so, in the final act of madness, he gathered his most loyal followers into a deep cavern beneath the battlefield, preparing to unleash the Thought Bomb. He believed that by doing so, he would wipe out the Jedi in a single stroke, turning their own strength against them. But Bane had already left them to their fate. He had no intention of dying alongside fools. He had fed Khan whispers of the thought bomb's power, letting the desperate Dark Lord believe it was his own idea. And when the ritual began, Bane watched from afar as the Brotherhood sealed itself in the tomb of its own making. The detonation was unlike anything the Force had ever known. The thought bomb did not simply destroy, it consumed. The Jedi and Sith alike, those trapped within the cavern, felt their very souls ripped from their bodies, drawn into a swirling vortex of dark side energy that would imprison them for eternity. Their screams, their terror, echoed through the Force long after their bodies had crumbled to dust. In that moment, the Sith were no more. The Brotherhood of Darkness had ceased to exist, not at the hands of the Jedi, but by their own failure to understand what it truly meant to be Sith. And Bane? He did not mourn them. He did not revel in their destruction. He simply moved forward, unchallenged, unopposed. He was now the last Sith, the only one worthy of the title. The Jedi would believe they had won, that the Sith were finally gone. But Bane had ensured their survival, not through armies or war, but through discipline, through patience. In the aftermath of Ruusan, he would take an apprentice, training her not as an equal, but as a vessel for the rule of two. The Sith would not return in fire and fury, but in whispers and shadows. And when they did return, it would not be as an army seeking conquest. It would be as a single will, guiding the galaxy toward a darkness it could not escape. The thought bomb had been more than a weapon. It had been a lesson. Those who lacked the strength to wield the dark side properly would destroy themselves. Only those who understood its true nature would endure. And so, as the dust settled on Ruusan, the galaxy believed it had seen the end of the Sith. But the Sith had only just begun. Darth Bane had shattered the Sith of old, reducing their once mighty legions to a singular lineage. The rule of two had been forged, but it would mean nothing if his chosen successor failed to embody its purpose. To ensure that the Sith would endure in secrecy and strength, he needed an apprentice not only capable of wielding the dark side, but worthy of eventually surpassing him. That apprentice was Darth Zannah. She was young, too young, some might have thought, when Bane took her as his own. A mere child when she first crossed his path, a frightened girl swept up in the carnage of Ruusan. Yet beneath that fragile exterior, he saw something few others would. Potential. The Force burned within her like a hidden storm, raw and unshaped, waiting to be forged into something greater. She was not chosen for sentiment. Bane did not believe in chance or mercy. He saw in her the qualities the Sith required to survive: cunning, intelligence, and an instinct for cruelty that would only grow sharper with time. But potential meant nothing without refinement. Zannah's training was brutal, relentless, designed to strip away anything that might weaken her. From the moment she became his apprentice, she was no longer the child she had once been. She was Sith, and that meant every lesson was a test of her ability to endure, to adapt, to grow stronger, or perish. The first thing Bane taught her was control, not just over the Force, but over herself. A Sith who could not master their emotions was a Sith doomed to be consumed by them. Rage, fear, pain, these were tools, not chains. He forced her to learn discipline, to harness her fury rather than be ruled by it. Unlike the Jedi who sought to suppress emotion, Bane encouraged her to embrace it, but only on her terms. Power was nothing if it could not be wielded with precision. Yet control was not enough. She had to learn deception, subtlety, the art of moving unseen. The Sith could no longer afford to wage open war. They would grow in the shadows, manipulate events from behind the scenes. Zannah became a master of misdirection, disguising her true strength behind the illusion of weakness. To the outside world, She remained unassuming, even delicate, a mere girl, harmless and overlooked. But beneath that facade, she was something far deadlier. Her gift for Sith sorcery set her apart from others who had come before her. While Bane embodied brute strength, Zannah's power lay in the mind. She could shatter wills, twist perceptions, ensnare enemies in nightmares from which they could never escape. The Jedi fought with lightsabers and battle meditation, but Zannah wielded something more insidious. With a thought, she could drive a man to madness. With a whisper, she could unravel a mind entirely. This balance between master and apprentice was the essence of the rule of two. Strength could not stagnate. The student was meant to surpass the teacher, to one day challenge and overthrow them. Bane had chosen Zannah not just to serve him, but to eventually destroy him. It was the paradox of the Sith. Each master trained their own doom. If the apprentice was weak, the Sith would wither. If they were strong, they would rise, and the cycle would continue. But in Zannah, Bane saw something that unsettled him. She was cunning, patient, too patient. She did not hunger for his throne the way he once had with Khan. She obeyed, learned, sharpened herself, but never made her move. It was not fear that stayed her hand. It was calculation. She would not strike until she was absolutely certain of her victory, and that was what disturbed Bane most. What if his apprentice never turned on him? What if she chose to serve rather than claim? The rule of two functioned only if the apprentice eventually replaced the master. If Zannah hesitated, if she failed to challenge him, then his vision for the Sith would die with him. In secret, Bane began to search for a way to extend his own life. He had no intention of falling to weakness, nor would he allow the Sith to fade into complacency. If Zannah refused to act, he would find a way to endure beyond his natural years, even if it meant bending the Force itself to his will. But Zannah was no fool. She knew her master's mind as well as he knew hers, and deep down, she understood what he feared, that she would wait too long, that she would hesitate. She had no such intentions. She would take what was hers when the time was right. But she would not be reckless. She would not challenge him on his terms. In the end, the Sith had never been about brute force alone. Strength was necessary, but survival demanded more. Cunning, patience, the ability to see beyond the moment. This was what separated a true Dark Lord from those who burned out too quickly. And so, Zannah watched. She learned. She waited. For the day would come when Darth Bane would fall, and when that moment arrived, she would be ready. The Sith had learned from their past failures. For centuries they had ruled in the open, waging wars against the Jedi and the Republic, only to be crushed time and time again. Their armies, their fleets, their empires, all had been swept away by the light. But Darth Bane had understood something his predecessors had not. Power was not meant to be flaunted. It was meant to be cultivated, nurtured in the darkness until it was strong enough to strike. The rule of two was not merely a philosophy, it was a blueprint for survival, and for 1,000 years the Sith followed it with unwavering discipline. To the galaxy, the Sith were extinct. The Jedi believed they had been eradicated on Ruusan, that the thought bomb had wiped out the last of their kind. This was the great illusion. While the Jedi basked in their victory, the Sith faded into legend, their name whispered only in the darkest corners of the galaxy. But they had not been destroyed. They had simply become unseen. The rule of two demanded secrecy, patience, and a long game that few could comprehend. The Sith of old had relied on brute strength, but the new Sith would be different. They would not lead armies. They would not conquer worlds. They would infiltrate, manipulate, and corrupt from within. Their power would grow not through open conflict, but through control. Darth Bane set this path in motion, but it was his successors who perfected it. Each generation of Sith, from Zannah onward, refined the strategy. They wove themselves into the fabric of the Republic, placing their agents in positions of influence. Politicians, financiers, scholars, even Jedi defectors who had lost faith in the Order. The Jedi, ever focused on external threats, never suspected the war being fought in the shadows. By the time of Darth Plagueis, the Sith had already sunk their claws deep into the Republic's institutions. The financial systems, the trade routes, the criminal underworld, everywhere one looked, the Sith had a presence. And yet, even as they pulled the strings, they remained invisible. The Jedi still believed in absolute victory, in the idea that darkness could be vanquished. They had not realized that darkness could be patient, that it could exist beneath their very noses without ever revealing itself. This hidden war was not waged with lightsabers, but with influence. Sith lords whispered in the ears of senators, planted ideas in the minds of rulers. They stoked rivalries, engineered conflicts, and manipulated economies. Wars were not fought for conquest, but for instability. Chaos was a tool, disorder a weapon. Each crisis they created weakened the Republic, made it more vulnerable to the moment they would finally emerge. The Jedi never saw it coming. They had spent centuries preparing for a war that no longer existed. They trained for duels, for battles against warriors in crimson robes, but their enemy no longer wore armor or wielded blades. Their enemy sat in the Senate, in the courts, in the highest offices of the Republic. The Sith had evolved beyond their expectations, and by the time the Jedi realized the truth, it was already too late. Darth Sidious was the culmination of this strategy, the ultimate product of 1,000 years of Sith cunning. Where others had ruled with fear, he ruled with deception. He did not conquer the Republic, he became it. He did not attack the Jedi, he turned them into soldiers. Every war, every battle, every conflict was part of a design that had been centuries in the making. But was Sidious truly the Sith's final evolution? Or had he, in his own way, broken the rule of two? The philosophy of Bane had been built on the idea that the Sith would remain hidden until the time was right. Yet Palpatine did not simply destroy the Jedi, he replaced them with something new. The Sith had always been masters and apprentices, but Sidious made himself emperor, with legions of enforcers and inquisitors. Did this mean he had transcended Bane's vision, or had he simply repeated the mistakes of the past? Perhaps this was the ultimate question of the Sith's hidden war. The rule of two had ensured their survival for centuries, but had it also been their cage? Bane had created the perfect strategy for secrecy, but in doing so, had he doomed the Sith to an endless cycle of destruction and rebirth? For all their patience, all their cunning, the Sith still fell. The hidden war had brought them to the heights of power, yet the moment they stepped into the light, they were vulnerable once more. Sidious had wiped out the Jedi, but he had also ensured that the Sith would be hunted again. In his arrogance, he had made the Sith known to the galaxy, and in doing so, he had undone a millennium of careful planning. Perhaps in the end, the Sith had always been their own greatest enemy. Their philosophy demanded conflict, demanded that each apprentice seek to overthrow their master. It ensured that only the strongest survived, but it also ensured that no legacy could last forever. The hidden war had been their triumph, but also their curse. And so the cycle continued. The Sith rose, the Sith fell. The rule of two endured, but its very nature ensured that it would never bring true stability. The hidden war was won, yet the Sith still lost. Perhaps that was the dark side's greatest truth, that strength alone was never enough, that even in victory, destruction was inevitable. The rule of two was designed for survival, for refinement, for the slow but inevitable rise of the Sith. Darth Bane had understood what his predecessors had not. Power could not be squandered among the unworthy. It could not be shared. It had to be cultivated, passed from master to apprentice, each generation growing stronger than the last. A master would wield ultimate power, but only until their apprentice surpassed them. And when that moment came, the apprentice would strike them down, ensuring that only the most cunning, the most ruthless, the most powerful would carry the Sith forward. From Bane onward, the Sith became a lineage of shadows, a chain of dark lords stretching through the centuries. Each apprentice trained in secret, their identity known only to their master. They gathered knowledge, refined their power, and waited for the inevitable moment when they would rise and take their master's place. Some Sith followed Bane's teachings with absolute devotion. Others, blinded by arrogance, believed they could improve upon his design. Some apprentices proved unworthy. The rule of two demanded strength, but not all Sith had the patience or foresight to wield it correctly. There were those who believed they could break free from Bane's philosophy, that they could expand the Sith beyond its rigid structure. But each time, their ambition proved to be their undoing. One such failure was Darth Cognis's apprentice, Darth Millennial. He saw the rule of two as a weakness, rejecting Bane's ideology in favor of a different path. He sought to create a Sith empire once more, to rule over a new age of darkness. But such an act was folly. Millennial's vision was fractured, his understanding of power flawed. His master cast him out, and he disappeared into exile, founding the dark side cult that would later be known as the Prophets of the Dark Side. But he was no true Sith. He was a defector, an aberration, an echo of the old failures that Bane had sought to erase. Yet not every apprentice who doubted the rule of two was cast aside. Some Sith lords recognized its limitations, even as they upheld it. Darth Plagueis, the master of Darth Sidious, sought to transcend it entirely. He believed in ultimate mastery, not through death and succession, but through immortality. He sought to manipulate the Force itself, to bend it to his will and make the Sith eternal. But his greatest flaw was his trust. He believed that Sidious, his apprentice, would serve alongside him as an equal, that they could rule the galaxy together. He forgot the fundamental truth of the Sith. Power is never shared. Sidious did what the rule of two demanded. He betrayed his master, ensuring that only one Sith remained. Darth Sidious was the last and perhaps the greatest of Bane's lineage. He did what no Sith before him had accomplished. He did not simply destroy the Jedi, he replaced them. He did not merely seize control of the Republic, he transformed it into his empire. But in doing so, he shattered the very philosophy that had allowed the Sith to survive for a millennium. He was no longer a Sith in the way Bane had envisioned. The rule of two had dictated that the Sith remain hidden, but Sidious ruled openly. It had ensured that there were only ever two Sith at a time. Yet Sidious created a vast network of dark side enforcers, inquisitors, hands, acolytes, all wielding power in his name. He may have called himself Sith, but in many ways, he had undone the very foundation of their survival. Perhaps this was the inevitable flaw in Bane's vision. The rule of two was designed for secrecy, for patience, for an unbroken chain of succession leading to ultimate power. But what happened when that power was finally achieved? What was the endgame for the Sith? Sidious had succeeded where others had failed, but in doing so, He made the Sith known to the galaxy once more. And as history had proven, the moment the Sith became visible, they became vulnerable. In the end, the line of the Sith Lords was both a testament to Bane's brilliance and a reflection of the Sith's inherent flaw. They sought absolute dominance, yet their philosophy ensured endless conflict. Each apprentice was trained to overthrow their master, ensuring that no Sith Lord could ever rule indefinitely. Even the strongest among them would one day fall. It was a cycle without end, a path that could only ever lead to destruction. The Sith had survived for 1,000 years under the rule of two. But survival was not the same as victory, and in their final moment of triumph, they ensured their own downfall. Darth Bane understood that knowledge was the true currency of power. The Sith had been wiped out before, not because they lacked strength, but because they had failed to safeguard their wisdom. They had allowed their teachings to be diluted, their philosophy to be fractured by infighting and ambition. Bane sought to prevent this. He would not allow the Sith's greatest secrets to fade into oblivion. If the rule of two was to endure, its lessons needed to be preserved, hidden, locked away, accessible only to those worthy enough to seek them. Thus, the Sith holocrons became the most valuable artifacts of the dark side. These pyramidal repositories were far more than simple records. They were extensions of the Sith Lords who had created them. Each holocron contained the essence of its creator, imprinted with their voice, their thoughts, their warnings, and their most closely guarded techniques. To access a holocron was to commune with the past, to receive guidance from Sith long dead, but never truly gone. Darth Bane's own holocron was a masterpiece of Sith craftsmanship. Within it, he encoded the core principles of his rule of two, the philosophy that would define the Sith for the next 1,000 years. He left behind detailed instructions on the nature of power, the necessity of betrayal, and the ultimate purpose of the Sith, to dominate the Force itself. It was not simply a guide for his apprentice, Darth Zannah. It was a safeguard against stagnation. If a future Sith Lord grew weak or complacent, the holocron's warnings would remind them of their duty, to grow stronger or to fall and be replaced. But Bane was not the only Sith to create such artifacts. Across the centuries, those who followed his path added their own knowledge to the hidden vaults of the Sith. Darth Plagueis, obsessed with the manipulation of midi-chlorians, encoded his research into holocrons, preserving forbidden techniques that could alter life itself. Darth Sidious, the culmination of Bane's lineage, ensured that his own holocrons contained dark truths so devastating that even the most hardened Sith would hesitate to wield them. These holocrons became the Sith's greatest inheritance, tools that ensured the survival of their ideology, even in the face of annihilation. Yet, for all their secrecy, these artifacts were not impervious to discovery. The Jedi, ever vigilant, knew of the existence of Sith holocrons. They had encountered them before, confiscated them, even locked them away deep within the archives of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. But the Jedi made a grave mistake. They underestimated the power of these devices. Unlike Jedi holocrons, which merely stored knowledge, Sith holocrons were dangerous in ways few could comprehend. They whispered to those who touched them, planting seeds of corruption in the minds of the weak. On more than one occasion, Jedi Knights fell to the dark side after coming into contact with Sith holocrons. Some, seeking to understand their enemy, gazed too deeply into the knowledge within. What began as curiosity became obsession. The holocrons did not merely teach, they tempted. They fed ambition, whispering promises of power, of knowledge forbidden by the Jedi Order. It was for this reason that the Jedi locked them away, burying them deep beneath the temple, hoping that time itself would erase their influence. But the Sith had long known how to infiltrate the Jedi. Darth Sidious, long before he revealed himself as Emperor Palpatine, sent agents into the Jedi Temple, recovering lost holocrons that had been hidden for centuries. Some were retrieved directly, while others were stolen in more insidious ways. Jedi who had fallen to the dark side smuggling them away, unaware that they had already become pawns in the Sith's greater design. Perhaps the most infamous use of a Sith holocron came during the final years of the Republic, when Darth Sidious used them to train his dark acolytes. His knowledge was vast, but even he relied on the wisdom of his predecessors. The secrets of Darth Bane, the rituals of Darth Plagueis, the forbidden techniques of lost Sith lords, these were the tools that shaped the rise of the Galactic Empire. The Jedi sought to destroy the Sith, but they never truly eradicated their teachings. Even after the fall of the Sith Order, their holocrons endured, waiting in hidden tombs, in forgotten temples, in vaults untouched for millennia. Some believed that the Sith holocrons would one day vanish, their influence fading with time. But the dark side does not die so easily. Knowledge, once recorded, is never truly lost. And for those who seek it, the Sith holocrons remain, whispering across the ages, waiting for the next apprentice to listen. Long before the rise of the Sith, before the Jedi discovered their connection to the Force, there were whispers of beings who shaped the very fabric of the galaxy. They were known as the Celestials, an ancient and enigmatic race whose influence could be felt in the great structures scattered across the stars, the Corellian system, the Maw, the unknown hyperspace anomalies that defied physics itself. But their greatest mystery was their role in the eternal struggle between light and dark. Did they create the balance, or were they merely servants of a power far greater than themselves? The Jedi and Sith saw the Force as something to be harnessed, something they could control. The Celestials, however, may have seen it differently. Legends suggest that these beings did not merely use the Force. They existed in perfect harmony with it. Some records speak of their ability to move entire star systems, bend time and space, and construct wonders beyond the reach of any known civilization. If these tales were true, then their understanding of the Force far surpassed anything the Jedi or Sith could comprehend. Among the most well-documented connections to the Celestials were the Mortis gods, three beings who seemed to embody the very essence of the Force itself. The Father, representing balance, struggled to maintain peace between his two children. The Son, an avatar of the dark side, sought chaos and domination. The daughter, pure in the light, wielded her power with wisdom, but was ultimately vulnerable to the ambitions of her brother. These beings, recorded in Jedi texts but dismissed as myth by most, were said to reside in a realm beyond time and space, a place where the Force was raw, untamed, and absolute. If the Mortis gods were real, what did this mean for the Sith? Did they serve the Son without ever realizing it? The Sith saw their conflict with the Jedi as a war for power, but what if they were simply tools in a much greater design? Darth Bane, the architect of the Rule of Two, believed he was reshaping the Sith for survival, forging them into something greater. Yet, in doing so, he may have unknowingly played into a cycle as old as the Force itself. A cycle of destruction and rebirth, of darkness rising only to be extinguished by the light, only to rise again. Bane's philosophy was rooted in strength, in the belief that only the strongest could rule. But strength alone does not dictate destiny. The Celestials, if they had ever truly existed, may have understood that balance was not about one side triumphing over the other. The Jedi sought to eradicate the dark side, believing it to be unnatural. The Sith sought to dominate the galaxy, bending the Force to their will. Both failed, and each time one side reached its peak, the Force corrected itself. Was Bane aware of this deeper truth? Did he believe he was above the forces that shaped the galaxy? His successors, from Darth Plagueis to Darth Sidious, carried on his vision, refining the rule of two into something even more insidious. They abandoned the open warfare of the past and embraced secrecy, manipulation, patience. And yet, for all their cunning, they still met the same fate as the Sith who had come before. Darth Sidious, the culmination of Bane's grand vision, built an empire that spanned the galaxy, only to see it collapse in a single moment, not through the might of the Jedi, but through the compassion of a son who refused to hate his father. If the Celestials still watched over the Force, did they see Bane's plan unfold? Did they see the Jedi's arrogance, the Sith's hunger, the inevitable return to balance? The ancient stories tell of their disappearance, of how they vanished from known space, leaving only their monuments behind. Some believe they ascended beyond the material realm, their work complete. Others suggest they were destroyed, undone by their own meddling in the cosmic balance. But if they were truly gone, why did their presence still linger? The world of Mortis, the artifacts scattered across the unknown regions, the strange occurrences that defied even the Sith's greatest sorceries, something remained, waiting to be uncovered. If the Sith were merely pieces in a larger game, who were the players? And more importantly, was the game itself one that could ever be won? Darth Bane believed that power was the only truth, that the Sith would only endure through the destruction of the weak. Yet, in the end, even the Sith who followed his path could not escape the tide of history. Their strength, their cunning, their mastery of the dark side, all of it led to the same fate as those who came before. The Celestials, if they still existed, may have foreseen this. Perhaps they knew that no matter how many times the Sith rose, they would always fall. The greatest mystery of the Force was not who wielded it, but why it continued to guide the galaxy in these endless cycles. And if the Celestials had ever known the answer, they had taken that knowledge with them, leaving only echoes of a forgotten truth. For centuries, the Jedi spoke of a prophecy, a figure who would bring balance to the Force. It was written in their oldest texts, whispered in hushed reverence, and debated endlessly by scholars and masters alike. But was this prophecy truly a Jedi belief, or did its origins stretch further into the unknown, perhaps even into the shadows of the Sith themselves? Did Darth Bane's rule of two, forged in secrecy and survival, unknowingly set the conditions for the prophecy's fulfillment? The Sith had long misunderstood balance. To them, it was an illusion, a weakness preached by Jedi who feared power. Their ideology thrived on dominance, the belief that strength was the only truth. But in their endless war against the Jedi, they failed to recognize that the Force was not meant to be controlled. It was meant to flow. And when the Sith sought absolute rule, they unknowingly created the very conditions that would lead to their downfall. Darth Bane reshaped the Sith after the devastation of the Brotherhood of Darkness, realizing that the Sith's obsession with numbers and internal strife had ensured their destruction. His rule of two was meant to correct this, to ensure that only the strongest carried the legacy forward. A master to embody power, an apprentice to crave it. Through this method, the Sith would become more than conquerors. They would become architects of the galaxy's fate. But in doing so, did Bane unwittingly set into motion a cycle that would lead to the rise of the Chosen One? The prophecy was never fully understood, not even by the Jedi. It spoke of balance, yet the Jedi interpreted this as the triumph of the light. They never questioned whether their own doctrine had led to imbalance, just as the Sith never considered that their own quest for control would be their undoing. But the Force, ever patient, moved through time, weaving events into inevitabilities beyond mortal comprehension. And so, the rule of two persisted. One master, one apprentice. Each generation refining the Sith's approach, infiltrating the Republic, corrupting from within. By the time Darth Sidious rose to power, the Sith had achieved what Bane had dreamed of: total control, the utter extinction of the Jedi Order. And yet, at the height of their dominance, the prophecy awakened. Anakin Skywalker, born not from the Sith, not from the Jedi, but from the Force itself. Did Bane's rule of two unknowingly lead to Anakin's creation? If the Sith had remained in the open, continuing their wars against the Jedi as they had for thousands of years, would the Force have intervened in such a dramatic way? The Jedi had become complacent, rigid in their thinking. The Sith, though hidden, were growing more powerful, more dangerous. The balance had tilted, and the Force corrected itself. But the Sith, arrogant in their understanding, could not see it. Sidious believed he had broken the cycle, that his empire would last for 10,000 years. He saw Anakin not as a prophecy fulfilled, but as a weapon to be wielded, a blade honed in the dark side's embrace. He sought to manipulate the will of the Force itself, bending it to his designs. But the Sith had never understood the nature of the Force. They wielded it, yes, but they did not listen. The tragedy of Anakin Skywalker was not just his fall, it was his purpose. He was shaped by the war, molded by Sidious, and yet in the end, it was not his strength that fulfilled the prophecy. It was his love. The Sith had spent centuries perfecting their philosophy, their deception, their power. But they had never accounted for something as simple as a son's belief in his father's redemption. Anakin was not Bane's undoing. He was the Sith's inevitable conclusion. Every Sith before him had sought ultimate power, had fought to reshape the galaxy in their own image. But none had realized that in doing so, they had only ensured their own destruction. The Force did not seek dominance. It did not crave war. It sought balance. And balance does not come from victory. It comes from the cycle, the endless ebb and flow of light and dark. The Jedi misinterpreted the prophecy. The Sith misunderstood balance. And the Force, in its infinite design, let them both believe they had control, even as it guided them toward an outcome neither could escape. Anakin was not created to destroy the Sith. He was created because they existed. The rule of two had made him necessary. The Sith's own philosophy had ensured his arrival. But was his story truly the end of the Sith? Or was it simply another step in their evolution? The dark side has never been truly extinguished. The Sith have always found ways to return. If the Force is a cycle, then the Sith, like the Jedi, are merely participants in its endless movement. Darth Bane once believed that his philosophy would ensure the Sith's survival for eternity. In a way, he was right. The rule of two gave birth to the Sith's greatest triumph and its ultimate failure. But even in that failure, something new was created, a new darkness waiting in the unknown. The Sith may have misunderstood balance, but the Force does not forget. And the question remains, if the Sith rose once before, will they rise again? Throughout the long history of the Sith, there were many who sought dominion over the Force, but few came as close as Darth Plagueis. He was not a warlord like Bane, nor a shadowy manipulator like Sidious. He was something far more dangerous, a visionary. His understanding of the dark side surpassed mere conquest, reaching into the deepest mysteries of life itself. He did not simply seek power, He sought control over existence itself. Plagueis was a Sith unlike any before him. He had no desire to rule an empire, no need for open conflict with the Jedi. His war was waged in secret, his weapons not lightsabers, but knowledge. He pursued the deepest secrets of the Force, not to destroy his enemies, but to render them irrelevant. To Plagueis, the Jedi and the Republic were already corpses, waiting to be buried. But what set him apart from all who came before was his obsession with immortality. The Sith had always craved power, but power was fleeting. Plagueis wanted something more. He wanted permanence. He sought to transcend the limits of the physical realm, to bend the Force to his will in a way that no being had ever achieved. The rule of two had ensured that only the strongest Sith survived, passing knowledge from master to apprentice, generation after generation. But Plagueis saw a flaw in this cycle. Every master was eventually overthrown, every apprentice destined to betray. What if that cycle could be broken? What if the master could live forever? In his mind, true Sith dominance would not come through war, but through the complete mastery of life and death. Plagueis' research led him to the most forbidden knowledge, the manipulation of midi-chlorians, the microscopic life forms that connected all living beings to the Force. If he could control them, he could create life. He could heal wounds, resist aging, prevent death itself. To the Sith, power had always been about control, and what greater control was there than over life itself? But therein lay his greatest weakness. The Sith thrived on the rule of two, a system that demanded conflict, that required each generation to surpass the last. Plagueis' vision violated this very foundation. If he achieved immortality, there would be no apprentice strong enough to take his place. He would break the chain, but in doing so, he would break the Sith. Darth Sidious, his apprentice, understood this flaw. Plagueis had taught him everything, revealed every secret, yet failed to see the true nature of the Sith. Power was not meant to be hoarded, it was meant to be seized. Plagueis believed that by defying death, he would make himself the most powerful Sith in history. He never realized that his greatest mistake was allowing Sidious to exist. The night of his downfall was not a battle. It was not the clash of lightsabers or the unleashing of dark side fury. It was quiet, simple, inevitable. Plagueis, who had unlocked the deepest mysteries of the Force, was undone not by power, but by his own arrogance. As he slept, Sidious struck. He did not hesitate, did not wait for some grand confrontation. He killed Plagueis as effortlessly as one might snuff out a candle. Was Plagueis truly blindsided, or had he foreseen his own death? Some believe he was caught unaware, betrayed before he could complete his work. Others believe he allowed himself to be struck down, knowing that he had already achieved what he set out to do. If his knowledge had transcended death, if his understanding of the Force had truly surpassed all limits, then perhaps his destruction was irrelevant. Perhaps he had already won. But in the end, what did he truly accomplish? His knowledge of the Force may have been greater than any Sith before him, but his fate was no different. His apprentice overthrew him, just as Bane had intended, just as every Sith master before him had fallen. The rule of two endured, and the cycle continued. Or did it? Sidious, unlike his predecessors, did not merely seek to rule. He sought to end the cycle altogether. He did not intend to pass his power to an apprentice. He had learned from Plagueis' mistakes and sought to take them further. He would achieve absolute control, not only over the Sith, but over the very fabric of the Force itself. Plagueis was dangerous because he saw beyond the Sith's old ways. He was not content with mere strength. He wanted knowledge, mastery, the ability to reshape reality to his will. But Sidious was dangerous because he understood what Plagueis had missed. Knowledge alone was not enough. Control alone was not enough. True power required ruthlessness. In the end, Plagueis was a stepping stone. He was the architect of a vision he never lived to see. His research, his manipulation of life and death, all of it would be carried forward, refined, and weaponized by Sidious. The Sith's greatest scientist was ultimately just another victim of its greatest strategist. But there is a lingering question. Did Plagueis truly die that night? If he had indeed mastered the manipulation of midi-chlorians, if he had truly transcended death, then did his spirit endure in some unseen form? Did he leave behind more than just knowledge? Was his presence still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return? Darth Plagueis was one of the most brilliant minds the Sith had ever known, but his legacy was not one of immortality. His greatest creation was not eternal life. His greatest creation was his apprentice, and in Sidious, the Sith would finally achieve what Bane had set into motion 1,000 years before. Plagueis may have sought to control the Force, but it was Sidious who would control the galaxy. The Sith had always been creatures of ambition, but none embodied the philosophy of total control as completely as Darth Sidious. He was not a warlord seeking conquest, nor a brute who relied solely on strength. He was the perfect culmination of the rule of two, an apprentice who surpassed his master, a Sith who understood that power was not seized through force alone, but through patience, deception, and absolute manipulation. Sidious did what no Sith before him had ever achieved. He did not merely challenge the Jedi, he erased them. He did not just rule the Sith, he eliminated the need for secrecy. By the time his reign began, he had transformed the very foundation of the Sith, bending their ancient philosophy to his own vision. Bane had ensured that only the strongest would lead the Sith, but Sidious was not content with being the strongest. He sought to be the last. From the beginning, Sidious was a master of deception. Even his earliest years as Sheev Palpatine were carefully orchestrated. Unlike previous Sith Lords, he did not seek to challenge the Jedi with brute force. He infiltrated the very fabric of the Republic, presenting himself as a humble politician, an unassuming figure who worked in the shadows while others fought on the battlefield. He knew that open war would never defeat the Jedi. Only subterfuge could accomplish that. Through careful manipulation, he played both sides of the Clone Wars, ensuring that the Jedi were stretched thin, their moral standing compromised, their place in the galaxy shattered. He presented himself as a benevolent leader, one who reluctantly took on more power to protect the Republic. And when the time was right, he struck with absolute precision. The Jedi were exterminated in a single move. The Republic was reforged into an empire, and he, Darth Sidious, had become Emperor. Yet despite all he had accomplished, Sidious' path diverged from the teachings of Bane. The rule of two dictated that the Sith should remain hidden, always preparing for the moment when they could strike. Sidious, however, believed secrecy was no longer necessary. He had removed the Jedi as a threat. He had reshaped the galaxy. The Sith no longer needed to operate in the shadows because they had won. The rule of two was no longer a philosophy of survival. It was obsolete. But had he truly honored Bane's legacy, or had he rewritten it to serve his own ego? Sidious never intended for his apprentice to surpass him. Where previous Sith Lords trained their successors to one day claim their place, Sidious ensured that no apprentice could ever match his power. He kept Darth Maul as a mere weapon, a tool of destruction. He groomed Count Dooku as a pawn, never truly allowing him to rise. And when he turned to Anakin Skywalker, It was not to mold a future Sith master, but to enslave him. Bane's vision was of an endless cycle, where each generation of Sith became stronger than the last. Sidious sought to end that cycle. He did not want an heir, he wanted permanence. If he had his way, there would be no future Sith Lords. There would only be him. But therein lay his greatest flaw. By hoarding power, by refusing to pass the mantle to a worthy successor, he ensured his own downfall. The rule of two had been a means of refining the Sith, making them stronger. Sidious, in his arrogance, believed he had no equal, and in doing so, he created the conditions for his own demise. His obsession with immortality, with cheating death, was a betrayal of the very principle that had allowed the Sith to endure for 1,000 years. Where Bane had ensured that only the strongest survived, Sidious sought to make himself the eternal master. In the end, it was not an external enemy that undid him. It was the consequences of his own arrogance. When Darth Vader turned against him, it was not just the act of a redeemed Jedi, it was the final consequence of Sidious' rejection of the rule of two. He had refused to allow his apprentice to grow, to become the next Dark Lord. He had broken the very philosophy that had enabled the Sith to exist for centuries, and in doing so, he ensured that his reign would not last. But was his downfall truly inevitable? Could he have ruled forever, had he not been betrayed? Or was his fate sealed the moment he abandoned the teachings of his ancestors? Sidious had rewritten Sith history, but had he truly evolved beyond the rule of two? Or had he merely proven that no Sith could ever truly escape its cycle? Even in death, his influence lingered. The Sith always found a way to return, and Sidious was no exception. Through unnatural means, he attempted to cheat fate, to extend his rule beyond its natural end. But the galaxy had already moved beyond him. The Sith had always been creatures of ambition, but their greatest flaw was believing that power alone was enough. Sidious had reached further than any Sith before him, but in the end, even he could not escape the fate of all who came before. Darth Sidious was the most powerful Sith in history, but was he the greatest? Or was he the final warning that absolute control is an illusion? For 1,000 generations, the Jedi had been the guardians of peace and justice. They believed themselves untouchable, their wisdom absolute, their connection to the Force unbreakable. Yet, in the end, they were undone not by brute strength, but by deception. The Sith did not march on the Jedi Temple as conquerors. They made the Jedi's own arrogance their weapon, and when the final moment came, the Jedi never even saw the blade descending. The destruction of the Jedi was not a spontaneous act. It was the result of a slow, calculated campaign that began long before the Clone Wars. Darth Sidious understood what no Sith before him had truly grasped. Power was not taken through war alone. The Jedi had survived countless wars, yet they fell in a matter of hours. How? Because Sidious ensured that when the blade struck, it was already buried too deep to stop. The Jedi did not lose the moment Order 66 was given. They lost when they allowed themselves to become generals instead of guardians. They lost when they accepted a war that they did not start, failing to realize that their very participation in the Clone Wars was a trap. Every battle weakened them. Every command issued from the Senate pulled them further from their purpose. They had once been independent, but now they were instruments of the Republic. And Sidious was the Republic. The Jedi's failure was not a lack of strength, it was blindness. They believed they could see the Force clearly, that their insight would always protect them. Yet the Sith had operated beneath their very noses for centuries. Even when the truth was right in front of them, they refused to accept it. The dark side had clouded everything, But it was not the dark side alone that doomed them. It was their refusal to question their own teachings. When the moment came, it was swift, merciless. The clone troopers, once the Jedi's allies, became their executioners. Across the galaxy, Jedi were struck down not in battle, but in betrayal. Those who had fought side by side with them did not hesitate. The Jedi had trusted the Republic, had trusted their soldiers, never realizing that the Republic had ceased to exist long before Palpatine's final declaration. The Purge was absolute. The Jedi Temple burned, its sacred knowledge erased. The Order, which had endured for millennia, was reduced to whispers, to scattered fugitives barely clinging to survival. And as the Jedi fell, the Sith stood victorious. The rule of two, once a philosophy of patience, had borne its greatest fruit. The Sith had won. But had they? The irony of the Sith's victory was that it came at a cost far greater than they could have foreseen. The rule of two had ensured that only the strongest Sith survived, but it had also ensured that they were always few in number. Sidious had destroyed the Jedi, but he had also made himself the sole ruler of the Sith. With the death of Count Dooku, he was left with only one apprentice, Darth Vader, a broken man barely able to survive outside his armor. The Sith had always thrived in the shadows, manipulating from the edges of power, but now there were no shadows left. The Sith were exposed, ruling openly for the first time. There was no Republic to corrupt anymore, no need for deception. And with that change came a danger no Sith before Sidious had ever faced: the full weight of the galaxy's hatred. The Jedi were gone, but their legacy remained. The very act of erasing them turned them into martyrs. As the Empire rose, so too did the seeds of rebellion. The Sith had waited 1,000 years to claim dominion, but in the grand scale of history, their empire lasted only a few decades. Perhaps this was always inevitable. The Sith had spent centuries perfecting the art of destruction, but could they ever truly rule? The rule of two ensured that the strongest Sith would always rise, but it also ensured that betrayal was inevitable. It was a cycle with no true ending, only temporary victories. Sidious had accomplished what no Sith before him had, yet in doing so, he had doomed himself. He believed he had eliminated the Jedi, yet through his own actions, he had set in motion their return. Anakin Skywalker had been his greatest triumph, but also his greatest mistake. In his arrogance, Sidious had assumed he had conquered fate itself. He had rewritten history, erased the Jedi, bent the Force to his will. But the Force does not bow to any one master. The Sith had thought themselves victorious, but the echoes of their triumph were already unraveling. The Sith's final revenge had come at a cost they could not afford, their own inevitable downfall. The rule of two had guided the Sith for 1,000 years, a doctrine forged in the fires of Darth Bane's ambition. A master to wield the power, an apprentice to covet it. This was the law that ensured the Sith's survival. Yet, in Darth Vader, the rule of two found its greatest paradox. He was not a Sith in the way that Bane had envisioned. He was powerful, but he was not free. He was feared, but he was not in control. And in the end, he would not preserve the Sith, but undo them. From the moment Sidious took him as an apprentice, Vader was an anomaly. Bane's Sith were meant to be cunning, patient, always seeking their opportunity to overthrow their master and take their place. But Vader had not come to power through calculated ambition. He had not learned the Sith ways through slow manipulation or quiet betrayal. He had been consumed by rage, lured by the promise of saving Padme, and broken in the fires of Mustafar. Did he ever truly embrace the Sith? On the surface, he was the very embodiment of their ideals, His power in the dark side was undeniable, his strength unmatched. He was ruthless, feared, relentless in his pursuit of the Jedi's extinction. And yet, beneath the armor, beneath the rage, something remained. Anakin Skywalker had not been erased completely. The Jedi he had once been still lingered, buried beneath years of pain and servitude. This was the flaw in Sidious' grand plan. The rule of two was built on the idea that the apprentice would always seek to surpass the master. But Vader never did. He did not covet Sidious' throne. He did not scheme, waiting for the moment to strike. He obeyed, even as he suffered. He was a Sith Lord in name, yet he had never truly claimed the title in spirit. The rule of two was not simply about succession. It was about evolution. Each new Sith Lord was meant to be stronger than the last, shaping the dark side into something greater. But Vader was not stronger than Sidious. He was something else entirely. He was trapped, bound by loyalty, by regret, by a past he could never outrun. And this made him dangerous, because the Sith could not afford weakness, and Vader's greatest weakness was the thing the Sith could never tolerate: attachment. Bane's doctrine had been clear. The Sith must be free of chains, unburdened by sentiment. Power was all that mattered. Yet Vader, for all his strength, had never truly let go of his past. He did not serve Sidious out of ambition. He did not hunt the Jedi out of hatred. He did it because he had nowhere else to turn, and Sidious knew this. That was why he never feared Vader's betrayal, until the end. The conflict between master and apprentice had always been the foundation of the Sith. It was the natural order. But Vader had no ambition to overthrow Sidious, not until Luke appeared. And when he did, something happened that had never happened in all of Sith history. Vader hesitated. For the first time, the Sith did not seek dominance over the next generation. He sought to reclaim something lost. The rule of two had never accounted for redemption. It had never prepared for the idea that an apprentice might seek something other than power. Yet that was exactly what happened. When faced with the choice, his master or his son, Vader chose not as a Sith, but as Anakin Skywalker. And in doing so, he shattered everything that Bane had built. Did his redemption end the Sith, or did it simply reset the cycle? In the moment that he cast Sidious into the abyss, Vader did what no Sith before him had done. He did not take the throne. He did not claim dominion over the dark side. He ended it. He fulfilled the prophecy of the Chosen One not by conquering the Sith, but by rejecting them. But history has a way of repeating itself. Sidious would return. The dark side would rise again. The rule of two may have died with Vader, but the Sith had always found ways to endure. Perhaps Bane's doctrine had never been about two Sith alone, but about ensuring that the Sith would always adapt. If Vader's betrayal was the end, then what came after? A true balance, or simply the beginning of another war yet to come? For generations, the Sith were believed to have been destroyed. First, with the fall of the Brotherhood of Darkness. Then, with the death of Darth Sidious and Darth Vader. Time and again, the galaxy had assumed their annihilation, only to learn too late that the Sith were never truly gone. The shadows that had once engulfed the Republic had merely retreated, waiting, watching, growing stronger in the places beyond known space. Did the Sith truly die with Vader, or were they merely waiting beyond the stars? The rule of two ensured secrecy, patience, and long-term survival, but Bane's doctrine was never the only Sith ideology. Others had existed before him: sects, cults, remnants of fallen empires. Bane's line had preserved the Sith in the heart of the Republic, but elsewhere in the unknown regions, something else was stirring. The dark side was vast, and it was not confined to a single lineage. Even during the Clone Wars, whispers had spoken of the Sith Eternal, a secretive cult devoted to the rebirth of Sith power. Hidden deep within Exegol, they were not a part of Bane's vision, nor did they follow the rule of two. Instead, they existed in the shadows, a gathering of acolytes who awaited the return of a Sith Emperor. Were they the heirs of the Sith, or were they something new entirely? Sidious had known of their existence. He had used them, shaped them, prepared them for the day when he would need to rebuild. And yet, they had remained hidden for generations, untouched by the wars that raged in the galaxy. When the Jedi fell, when the Empire rose, when Vader cast down his master, where were they? What did they see in these events? Did they view Vader's betrayal as the true death of the Sith? Or did they believe it was merely a failure of one Sith Lord, insignificant in the grand design of the dark side? The unknown regions held many secrets. It was said to be the birthplace of the Chiss, home to lost civilizations, and a graveyard for explorers who had vanished without a trace. But beyond the hyperspace storms and uncharted anomalies, it was also a haven for those who sought to escape the eyes of the Republic, the Jedi, and the Empire. It was a place where darkness could grow without interference. Were the Sith Lords of old watching from the shadows, waiting for their moment to return? Bane's rule had ensured that the Sith would always evolve, that the weak would be destroyed and the strong would rise. But the Sith Eternal did not follow his doctrine. They did not seek a single master and apprentice. They sought an empire, an endless hierarchy of followers devoted to a reborn Sith ruler. In this way, they were both a perversion of Bane's teachings and a reflection of the ancient Sith order that had once ruled the galaxy. The question remained, was this the true evolution of the Sith, or was it merely a distorted echo of their past failures? Dark side cults had existed throughout history. From the sorcerers of Tund to the disciples of Ragnos, there had always been those who sought to harness the dark side outside of the Sith order. Some had been wiped out by the Jedi. Others had faded into obscurity. But the Sith Eternal had endured, and their presence raised a dangerous question. Was the galaxy ever truly free of the Sith, or had they merely retreated to the edges of known space, waiting for the right moment to strike? If Bane's vision had ensured the Sith's survival, then the Sith Eternal posed a dilemma. They were a remnant of a lost empire, a return to the old ways, a rejection of the rule of two. But did that mean they were weaker? Or had they discovered something that Bane's lineage had not? Had they found a way to outlast the endless cycle of master and apprentice, betrayal and succession? Sidious had used them, but had he truly controlled them? And if the Sith Eternal existed, how many others remained undiscovered? How many dark side sects still clung to forbidden knowledge, hidden away in the forgotten corners of the galaxy? Perhaps the Sith were never truly meant to die. Perhaps, like the Jedi, they were always meant to return. The question was not if they would rise again, but when. Darth Bane reshaped the Sith with a single decree. Two there should be. No more, no less. One to embody power, the other to crave it. His rule of two was designed to prevent the mistakes of the past, to eliminate the self-destructive infighting that had plagued the Sith for millennia. Yet, in the centuries that followed, did his vision truly succeed? Or did it merely ensure that the Sith would never achieve the victory they so desperately sought? The echoes of Bane's philosophy reverberated through every Sith Lord that followed. From Darth Zannah to Darth Sidious, each master and apprentice carried the same lesson. Power must be earned through strength, and weakness must be destroyed. The idea was elegant in its simplicity. A master would train an apprentice, and when the apprentice grew strong enough, they would challenge their master. If the master was weak, they would die. If they were strong, they would survive to train another. In theory, this would ensure that only the most powerful Sith ruled, sharpening the dark side into an unstoppable force. But in practice, the rule of two ensured something else entirely. The Sith were always at war with themselves. Each master feared the inevitable betrayal. Each apprentice knew their training was never meant to complete their education, only to prepare them for a single moment, the day they would strike down their teacher. And so the cycle continued. Power built upon murder, strength built upon paranoia. The rule of two did not create an invincible Sith order. It created an endless loop of destruction. Was this Bane's failure or his ultimate success? In the days of the ancient Sith, power had been diluted among thousands. Lords warred with each other, each one claiming dominion, yet none strong enough to rule without opposition. When the Jedi came, the Sith crumbled beneath the weight of their own ambition. Bane sought to prevent that. He believed that limiting the Sith to only two at a time would prevent their self-inflicted downfall. But did it truly? Or did it simply guarantee that no Sith would ever consolidate their rule? The final Sith to emerge from Bane's lineage, Darth Sidious, achieved what none before him had. He did not merely defeat the Jedi, he erased them. He did not merely rule the shadows, he ruled the galaxy. He took the rule of two and turned it into a weapon against its own philosophy. He trained an apprentice, yet never truly intended to be overthrown. He discarded his own master, yet ensured that Vader would never be strong enough to challenge him. He did what no Sith before him had done. He broke the cycle. But in doing so, he also proved its greatest flaw. For all the strength of the Sith, for all their cunning, for all their patience, they had never considered that the true key to victory was not power, but legacy. The Jedi had endured for thousands of years because they built something greater than themselves. They did not rule through fear, but through purpose. The Sith, under Bane's rule, ensured that no apprentice ever inherited a master's dream, only their power. And so when Sidious fell, the Sith fell with him. Did Bane unknowingly doom his own order? Even before Sidious, there were those who questioned the rule of two. Darth Plagueis, a Sith obsessed with immortality, sought to break the cycle, not through betrayal, but through mastery over life itself. He saw in Sidious an apprentice who might not need to kill him, but one who could rule beside him. And yet, his vision ended as so many others did, with a blade in the dark. His death was proof that the Sith had not evolved, only repeated their ancient patterns. If there had been another path for the Sith, what would it have looked like? The Sith had always sought strength, but was their destruction inevitable? If they had embraced a different philosophy, one that did not rely on betrayal, could they have built an empire that truly lasted? Could they have created something greater than a single ruler, greater than a fleeting moment of dominance? Bane's rule was meant to ensure that the Sith survived, but perhaps survival was never the same as victory. The Sith endured, yet they never truly won. Every empire they built collapsed. Every master was killed by an apprentice who would, in turn, be killed by their own. Every plan was ultimately undone by the same cycle Bane had put into motion. And so the final question remains: was Bane a savior or the architect of the Sith's eternal failure? His rule allowed the Sith to persist in the shadows, to strike when the Jedi had become complacent. But his rule also ensured that the Sith could never be more than a whisper in the darkness, waiting for the moment to rise, only to fall again. Perhaps that was the greatest irony of all, that the man who sought to ensure the Sith's survival was also the one who guaranteed that they could never truly win. For centuries, the Jedi and Sith have been locked in an endless struggle. Each rise of one side guarantees the resurgence of the other. Darth Bane sought to reshape this conflict, believing that through secrecy and control, the Sith could ultimately triumph. But in doing so, did he create balance, or did he trap the Sith in an eternal cycle of destruction? The Jedi viewed balance as the eradication of darkness, while the Sith saw dominance as the natural order. Neither side truly understood the Force in its entirety. Bane's rule of two ensured the Sith would survive, but it also meant they would always remain in opposition to the Jedi. By limiting the Sith to a master and apprentice, he prevented their self-destruction, but he also ensured they would never fully eliminate their enemies. The Jedi, too, were trapped in this cycle. Their refusal to acknowledge the dark side as part of the Force left them blind to its influence. They sought peace through control, just as the Sith sought power through destruction. Neither could exist without the other. If the Sith had truly ruled unopposed, would they not have collapsed under their own greed? If the Jedi had eliminated all darkness, would they not have stagnated? Bane believed in strength, not destiny. He rejected the idea that the Force had a plan, yet his actions set the stage for everything that followed. The Sith infiltrated the Republic, orchestrated its downfall, and achieved what Bane had envisioned. But in the end, they fell, just as they always had. The question remains, did Bane's rule of two lead to the Sith's ultimate success, or did it merely ensure that the war between Jedi and Sith would never end? Perhaps balance is not about victory. It is not about light defeating dark, nor darkness consuming light. It is motion, conflict, struggle. The Force does not seek stillness. It seeks equilibrium through perpetual change. If the cycle is eternal, then neither Jedi nor Sith can ever truly win. Perhaps that is the design of the Force itself. The Sith believed they sought ultimate power, but were they ever truly free? From the moment Darth Bane forged the rule of two, Sith Lords were bound by a contradiction. They pursued dominance, yet were always fated to be challenged, betrayed, and replaced. The apprentice was meant to overthrow the master, ensuring only the strongest survived. But in this endless cycle, was true power ever attained? The Sith saw themselves as rulers, yet the dark side itself ruled them. The more they fed their hunger for strength, the more it consumed them. Palpatine, the culmination of Bane's vision, achieved absolute control, but it did not last. Like all Sith before him, he fell. The dark side offers power, but it demands everything in return. Did Bane foresee this inevitability? Perhaps he knew the Sith would never truly win, but sought to extend their survival for as long as possible. Or perhaps he believed that with the right apprentice, the Sith could finally break the cycle. But in the end, the rule of two did not guarantee victory. It merely prolonged the Sith's struggle against their own nature. They sought immortality, yet they were always fated to die. They craved control, yet they were always at the mercy of the dark side's will. The greatest lie of the Sith was not their deception of the Jedi, it was their deception of themselves. The Sith and the Jedi were always two halves of the same cycle, locked in a struggle that neither could escape. Where the Jedi sought peace through detachment, the Sith pursued strength through dominance, yet both orders were bound to the same fate, rising to power, only to fall. Darth Bane's rule of two was his answer to the Sith's self-destructive nature. By limiting their numbers, he sought to refine their power, ensuring only the strongest survived. In this, he succeeded. For 1,000 years, the Sith remained hidden, their influence growing in the shadows. They manipulated the Republic, dismantled the Jedi, and, through Darth Sidious, achieved what no Sith before had: complete galactic control. But in that triumph lay their greatest weakness. The rule of two was built on the foundation of betrayal. No master could trust their apprentice, and no apprentice could be loyal. Each Sith lived knowing they would one day be replaced or destroyed. It was a philosophy that ensured strength but also guaranteed destruction. In the end, Sidious was not overthrown by a Sith seeking power, but by one who rejected the Sith entirely. So did Bane's vision succeed, or did it doom the Sith to extinction? The truth is both. The Sith endured longer than ever before, yet their downfall was inevitable. They believed power was the ultimate goal, but power is fleeting. No empire lasts forever. No Dark Lord rules without end. But belief? That is eternal. The Sith may have fallen, but the ideas of the dark side persist. Somewhere in the galaxy, new followers of the Sith's teachings may yet rise. The question remains, will they repeat the same mistakes, or will they break the cycle at last?